transition a bit more towards pottery, which I think is probably what most people are most interested in. So I'm actually most curious, like, what made you really get into pottery, like as a hobby, first of all, and then a profession?
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I mean, I started pottery twice. One time, or the first time was in high school as an elective, and I hated it. Got a B in it. My
A B
instructor
is
said I
not bad, right?
it was
Like
an art class. I felt like it was like a failure, and
you
being Asian felt like
you
it was
know
a
what's
failure.
you know what's so funny is, like, so I work with artists in my day job, and like I was like, how do people grade art, right? And a lot of it is just like, because art is supposed to be the subjective thing. That's what, like, teachers, I would imagine teachers kind of tell you before you actually get graded. It's your own self-expression, but it's often like, how often did you follow the brief, right, or the assignment, uh, relative to what you're supposed to create? And so that's kind of my, like, interjection, I guess, like, of how art, quote unquote, gets graded, is how closely you follow the.
I followed the brief. She just said I wasn't trying hard enough, and I had a bad experience because of that. So I didn't really look back or wanted to pursue pottery after that elective. But then 10 years later, 2016, I was going through such a bad time in my life, such a rough patch after a breakup. My grandma had a massive stroke. I was on the verge of losing my job or getting laid off because of like they weren't doing well, and I had nowhere to live for a moment. So it was just like a shitty time in my life. And I wanted to get out of that like funk. And I decided to restart pottery and take a ceramics course on wheel throwing at a local community studio, and completely dove deep, just like I did with yoga. So deep that like I did it. Like I took that course, which became kind of like an open studio, like do your own practice, self study, like for 5 years, I think.
It's a long time, 5 years.
Yeah, I took it every single quarter for 5 years straight until like enrollment just got too difficult to like sign up. And
Like,
I also volunteered. Oh, go ahead.
so I was going to stop you there, and I was going to ask, like, in those 5 years, right, like, because you were taking classes after classes after classes, like, what was that process like, going through all those classes again? Because I'm even though you did pottery in high school, like, now doing it as, an adult, right, with different kinds of experiences, and you have maybe some of the basics down, right? Talk to me a little bit about um, the process of going through all those classes and what it felt and meant to you.
Well, for me, it felt like it wasn't so much the like I love my instructor. He was so kind and patient, and if I had a question, he helped me, which I feel really grateful for. But for me, taking the classes was just for my own personal practice, kind of like making things I wanted to make instead of like a syllabus and like
Right.
syllabus agenda. So I don't work that way. I kind of like to free flow and do whatever I want in terms of my creativity and what I want to make. And he allowed us to do that. And that helped me a lot because I would do a project, maybe make it like chip and dip bowl, and I had a question about it. So he would come and ask or see how I can improve on it, or help me with techniques. He was kind of just like there when I needed him. So that guidance. But for the most part, it was on my own and just practicing, having that time and space allotted at least once a week to practice. But then I got so deep into it, I was going to the studio like 4 times a week. I volunteered for them for
Nice.
free in exchange for like open studio time, even more time to practice. So it was like my second home. I lived there. Like I had my own locker and it was great. And I just felt so at home there. And just got so deep into flow every time I was on the wheel. And the wheel, like making the actual pots, is still my favorite part of the process.
So I want to
So,
hold, like,
yeah.
that thought,
Mm-hmm.
like the flow part, we'll get to it in a little bit, but I guess, one, it sounded like you had, like, your teacher, right, inspired confidence in you, and it was almost like your own sort of pottery therapist, right, to a certain degree. So that's something that one I kind of noticed. And then two, it sounds like when you're going through this really difficult time in your life, right, that pottery and going to all the classes gave you that stability, right? Gave you almost like in a sense, like seemed like a sense of purpose, right? Just something to like a routine that you go through, but also to like release,
It
right?
was,
Like those
it was,
emotions.
yeah, it was the only thing I looked forward to. The only thing, like, I wasn't looking forward to anything else really besides having as much time as I could in the studio.
Yeah, it sounds like that structure really helped, right? In terms of like, whatever you're going through at the time of your life, and then pottery, you knew that it was going to be the consistent thing that was always going to be there. And maybe there was maybe, I don't know, imagine in those classes, right? You're doing different kinds of tasks, you're activating different parts of your emotions, your brain, and like the physical aspect of the wheel, which I want to go back to, is like you talked about that flow state that
Oh,
you
yes.
you
So,
experience.
yeah. Because my work was so heavy emotionally, there, like, pottery was kind of like my therapy for me, my self-care. It was a place where I just didn't have to think. Being on the wheel, it was just like almost just autopilot. Like, I can throw 100 pots easy and not think about
Like,
it, and
okay,
it's
well,
just,
first, what is throwing 100 pots? Like, are you talking about literal pots, right? Like throwing it, right? Or like talking about a little bit about
Oh,
what the
sorry.
throwing the pots actually mean in a pottery sense?
So, okay, first, that was an exaggeration. I don't throw 100 pots in one sitting. I can do about 25, and like a bag of clay. And
Okay.
that throwing a pot means to be on the wheel, like throwing a ball of clay down onto the wheel head while it's spinning. You kind of like create a form and
And
shape
that's
with your
one pot,
hands.
right? One ball of clay is one pot.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that's kind of just what I did for self-care.
I guess what I'm curious about is the physical sensory aspect of it, right? Of pottery. Like you talked about the emotional side of it and how it was, there for you. But talk to me a little bit about when you're actually like the experience of putting your hands on the clay, like the water, right, and the texture of the clay, and how that is potentially, I guess, like a self-healing aspect of pottery.
Well, I'm very hands-on, so I like making things with my hands. Being able to do ceramics, you are using your hands all the time, especially like on the wheel. You use your hands to make your forms and create the different shapes you want. And I think touch is definitely very healing. So the touch to clay, touch to mud, getting dirty. It's also a way to let go of like professionalism sometimes, like in being such a like a tight professional environment and just getting messy. So it's fun.
I was actually wondering, right, like if you could describe, like, because maybe there are people who haven't actually done any pottery, or maybe the extent of the pottery that people have done is for like a work group kind of team outing, right? Or, kind of barely just scratching the surface, like no pun intended. Like, talk to me about the sensory experience of, putting your hands on the wheel, right? Like, what does your body feel when you're actually
Oh,
working the clay, right? And the flow state, and I feel like that's part of the flow state, like as well, is the sensory aspect.
if you're new to throwing on the wheel for pottery, it's gonna feel like terrible. I think like you're gonna like not have stability in your body, or you can't center the clay. It takes a while to get comfortable with the clay before it starts to feel good and before you start to get into flow. So being able to set those expectations there and having the patience and like trusting the process, that practice does work. But the sensation of it, um, like, do you mean after being able to get into the state of flow?
I would say even just like touch, yeah, getting into that state of flow, right? And like touching it. Like, as for example, you're putting your hands on the clay, right? The wheel is turning, right? You feel the clay going against like your hand, right? And obviously you probably need some water on there as well. Like, you know, talk to me about like what do you feel like when you put it on there?
Oh, well, it's different for different bodies of clay as well. Sometimes it's gonna feel really nice and buttery smooth, like porcelain or a really fine clay. But other times, like if there's a really groggy clay with a lot of like grog in it, which is like kind of like sand, I guess,
Okay. It's a little bit
it's
rougher.
gonna, yeah, rough clay, it's gonna hurt your hands. It's gonna like beat your hands up and make it raw sometimes. So there's definitely different sensations with different clay bodies, and it's really what is your preference.
Do you feel that the clay, based off the texture and stuff like that, has their own body of like personality, right? Like, is that something like how a lot of potters may sort of approach it, right? Where it's just like, oh, maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with this groggy clay, like this one's gonna be a rough one, right? And there's a different kind of like expectation and preparation that they might, put
Um,
themselves through for that.
that's also an interesting question because like for groggy clay, you have more structure with it. You can pull it like a lot taller. It has more like you can make more height usually. And then with porcelain clay, which is a very like it's like the purest form of clay,
Hmm.
and it's very soft, very wobbly sometimes, very delicate. It really depends on the look you want. You can get it really thin, which is the appeal of porcelain. You can have it like really nice and thin and sometimes
Right.
translucent. Um, but it's also very finicky, so it's difficult to work with. I forgot the question. Sorry.
Oh, it was just more like the sensation, right, of it. Like you talked
Oh, yeah.
about, like it's finicky, right, for porcelain, and I imagine also that's why, like maybe plates, right, tend to be good candidates for porcelain because they can be on plates can be on the thinner side. I imagine like at the ends and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, that's just kind of like was my initial thought. It was just that the clay and the materials and however you mix it, right, they have their own
Mm-hmm.
unique personalities, and it's almost like you're maybe it's not the right word, but almost anthropomorphizing it. Like I thought about it as like the clay is a kind of horse, right? Or it's just like this one is a really wild horse, right? Like it's gonna, maybe more advanced, right, to take care of. Others may have a different kind of personality to them. So I'm just curious
Oh,
if like
yeah.
potters really think about it not just like as here's some clay, it's rough, but like
Mm-hmm.
more in
Yeah,
a metaphoric kind of
I
way.
see. There is, yeah. So once you say it that way, I definitely use different clays for different looks that I want and for different like appeals. There's like a black clay that I love to use when I want to like feel more experimental and edgy and have that contrast of black and like colors or black and white. So it's more contrasted, more shocking to see. If I want to experiment with more like bright colors, I use a white clay or a porcelain clay so that it's like more fun, more colorful, more bright, and you get those deep, vivid colors. That that's personally what I enjoy using the most. And then if I want more structure, being able to throw taller, have more of like a brown earthiness to a look, then I will use a stoneware clay or a speckled clay, which often that's pretty like trendy, I think. So
Like
a lot of people use that.
do you feel that because we were talking about therapy and self-healing, especially and kind of potentially how it ties into pottery. Like, do you feel that maybe you're having, let's just say you're having a rough day, or like there's a certain element of that physical clay experience just based off of kind of like different personalities that are just like, today is a black clay day because I really want, a certain type of feeling and I'll work with that, for now. Is like, do potters make decisions on kind of how they're feeling, right? And how they want to work with like a specific kind of clay for a physical kind of sensation or emotional kind of thing. Less so about like the actual um, physical or I guess like visual result, but just thinking almost
Mm-hmm.
kind of combining it more as like a self healing method, right?
I see. For me, not so much. I experiment with different clays when I am in the mood to experiment, or when I get bored of using one
Okay,
clay for so long. Yeah, that's when I start to kind of have variations with my looks.
got it. One question, and to kind of transition a little bit, that I have a question about is, you know, why should people support their local potter? And the reason why I ask this question is because, oftentimes, pottery in terms of, I imagine in terms of selling pottery or bespoke pieces, or even like big business kind of pieces, like pottery can have a wide range of costs, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
some people are just like, here's a cup, right? This is whatever, $4. Maybe it's not the most bespoke piece, but like they're thinking maybe more about the functionality or how cheap it is versus like there are some people who may pay, I don't know, 40 USD, 80 USD. Heck, it could even be like 200 or whatever for something, really nice and bespoke. So talk to me a little bit about, why people should support kind of their local potters. Like, what do you hope that people who purchase pottery kind of get out of it, get out of that experience and the product?
Well, it's like the appreciation for the amount of work that goes into making a ceramic piece. It's so much, and that it's like so much behind the scenes that you don't see. Like you can go to Target and buy a $4 mug, and that's manufactured. But if you buy something locally from a ceramic artist, they make it themselves with their own hands. They go through the different stages of firing. They glaze it. They like make the form. They do everything, and it's such a long process. I think that everybody like who is a ceramic artist, or most people, are underselling their work. Definitely,
Yeah.
it's worth way more than $40 for a mug. In my opinion. So I price my mugs like like my average range for my pieces are between like 90 to maybe 175 or something like that, like depending on what it is. But there is so much more behind the price and the value that is not seen. Like
I guess, like,
I
how
don't
do you get
know. It's
people
yeah.
to recognize that? Because that seems to probably be the most difficult part of maybe art in general, right? Like, what is the val? How do people value it, right? How do you get someone to value it? Like, I would say even a cup has more usefulness, right, than a painting, but people are willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a painting that kind of just hangs on the wall, and obviously can have different kinds of value. But I'm curious how
Yeah.
kind of potters, like even within your industry, kind of talk about how do we get an everyday person to really understand like the level of love and care and the expressions that go with it, so that you
That
can share that value.
yeah. That's a completely loaded question. That is a common question for all
Sure.
potters, and I can't answer that in depth, but only speak for myself.
Right.
I put into my pricing like my time, my energy, my experience, my years of experience, my uncommon techniques that I use, like maybe gold luster that I use, that is really expensive, and I use a lot of it. My own value, like the value that I place on myself for each piece, and maybe the uniqueness of it. They are all unique, but like, am I going to recreate something like this again? Will I be willing to or not? Um, all of that comes into play, and it's really based on the artist specifically, like personally, how they feel like they should price their piece. Like besides material costs,
Right.
it's so much more behind it.
Like, I think maybe what people don't understand is how many years of effort it takes, maybe to say, to make a straight line, right? Or to apply a certain type of technique that looks relatively simple in visually, but maybe they just don't understand like the years of expertise, like all the failed experiments, right? All the work that has
Mm-hmm.
been put into getting, I'm just using an example, that line or maybe the handle just right so that when it fits in your hand or when you're holding it, there's a certain type of sensation that you get from
Mm-hmm.
it, depending obviously what angle you're looking at it, or how you're using it. So that's kind of like how I imagine, and what people don't really understand about the value of
I
art.
I think it's just really the artist having to explain it, having to explain how like long the process is, and letting their customers know that this is the work behind it.
I think that totally makes sense. And I think storytelling is a big aspect, I imagine, for a potter, right? Because the pieces that you guys make, or the pieces that potters make are an expression of themselves to a certain degree. And so I think where it kind of comes from, right? Like what value, if you want to put values and emotions, right, into, the pieces, I think that's something that like can really help sell what it is that makes, that specific potter like super unique.
Right. Yeah. So for my followers, I try to um, like let them know about my process as much as I can, like how much work is put into each piece, and just be as open as I can with my own boundaries,
Right.
what things I don't feel ready sharing yet. So I hope they understand where, like, how much work I put into each piece.
One thing that I do want to ask and transition to is, we talked about traveling, we talked about being a yogi, talked about, opening up your own private practice, like how these kinds of different life experiences like influence your ceramic style and the way that you express yourself through your art and pottery.
Well, they do inspire me in different ways. It's not, I would say, just like all of those experiences, it's not like direct inspirations. Like, I don't look at a landscape and I try to recreate it. That's not my style at all. Like, my style is like from the energy that I hold on to, from an experience, from a travel experience, from like maybe Burning Man, holding on to that energy and being able to translate it and recreate how I felt into my work and into my art. So that for me is when I get into the flow state, when I get into like just intuition and creating something in my mind on a piece of pottery. And I think that I like to work like very fluidly, without a lot of structure, and kind of almost like winging it, but with like some like idea in mind. So I have like somewhat of a concept, like kind of like the feel. I kind of go by feel, other than like rather than like direct like like things.
Direct comp, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't go by directly trying to recreate the ocean or anything. That's not how I work with my art, but it's more of like the energy I feel in the moment.
So when people buy or look at your pieces, it's like almost like they're buying a piece of your mind and state of
Mm-hmm.
being, like at that point in time, because
Yeah, definitely.
that's what it kind of sounds like. And I'm curious if that's what kind of goes into like the naming of your products, right? Like how do you come up with the different names based off of like
So
the end product?
I'm not attached to the naming process at all. I even ask my followers to help me name pieces, because that's not where my creativity lies. I'm not creative with that, or description. So I get a lot of like help from them.
Okay.
But I see things as a whole, like as like more, yeah, an overview, and kind of see how I feel about it. And something might look more like a galaxy. That was not the intent, but it kind of
Sure.
looks like that. So I'll name the collection that. Or I had a really hard time naming this one collection, which ended up being Subi's ice cream, and it makes
Okay.
no sense. But it was how I felt. It was like fun and cute and looked melty like ice cream, and like
Or
I thought it
potentially the
was
way
really
that
cute.
you dress up Subi, right? Like it goes into
Yeah.
maybe all your fashion collection or for Subi or something like that too.
Yeah, and I mean, it was also kind of a tribute to her. Like, I'll name my collections as like probably that's the only one that was a tribute, but like in future collections, maybe something that was meaningful to me at some time.
Got it. I'm curious about the preparation phase when you're thinking about creating something. So not necessarily like what kind of materials you use and stuff like that, but more just like what kind of flow state, like mentally, not necessarily on the clay, like but thinking like okay, you want to come up with a different kind of concept. You talked about how you're feeling at that point in time. Is there a way that you kind of get into a routine, like where things are kind of predictable within a framework, right, to help produce a different kind of result or an expected result, some controlled
Um,
result?
And like when I'm experimenting with new work, is that what you mean? Like kind
I
of.
think it's more like for example, do you make sure you get X amount of sleep, right? You wake up in the morning, right?
Hmm.
Like you do a routine, right, to get ready to actually either come up with a concept, to get ready to throw clay, right? Like what is that routine that actually you
Oh,
prepare for
I
before you even
see.
get to the wheel for your idea?
Um, Lately, I'm still learning my routine. So lately, I've just been having like kind of general goals for the week and trying to complete them by the weekend. But along the way, just throughout, the past years, I've been writing down in notes like things I want to make in the future or want to experiment with. So I have a long list of things that I've been wanting to do. And when the time is right, when I feel like I'm like interested or feel like pumped to try to do one of those things, I'll do it off the list. And that's where I get kind of the prompt from, I guess.
Okay.
And that's where I'll kind of focus and I go back to past work and see how I can like make it better.
Like talk to me about the focus aspect of it. Like what is focus in a pottery sense or in a pottery point of view?
But what do you mean by focus in a
So you
pottery
talk
sense?
about like, is it when you're saying you want to go back into focus, right? Is it the focus on the wheel, right?
Oh,
Like when
oh, no, no,
you're,
no. So I'll have like a piece that I have made in the past, like 5 years ago, and I'll
yeah,
go back to that same piece and see how I can evolve it to something that is what I am feeling like that would be how I'd want to make that similar piece today. So evolving it, kind of
okay. Like
like advancing that
what's an
piece.
example of like evolving it? Like let's say you have something in your
Um,
collection
I would
and
say
like are you thinking like I think this could use more sparkles, right? Or do you want to
sure.
take like maybe because I know you it seems like based off of the work that you do, you specialize in small plates or I don't know if you call them plates, but just flat pieces of pottery or smaller plates and mugs, right? Or small cups and things like that. Is it like hey, I want to take this thing and transform it into something else, right? Or like what's the kind of like types of inspiration or that you're looking typically to make when you're evolving stuff?
Um, well, I mean, for an example, I've worked with black clay for a long time. Years ago, I've started working with black clay, and only recently, like a few months ago, I went back to it. And I looked back
Okay,
at my past work with black clay and was thinking about, oh, how can I make this better? So this year, I kind of added on to it, added more color instead of just using white, added more gold to make it like more like a modernized version of it or today's version.
got it. So in your sounds like you're thinking about where it was and then
Mm-hmm.
how you sort of envision it and is it based when you say modernize it right it's like are you thinking about
Mm-hmm.
the current trends right or is it like how do you balance out that current trend aspect to the point where it's not like every other piece but it also has
I
your own
see.
kind of unique spin when you talk about
Um,
modernizing something?
and yeah, I don't mean current trends. I try to even have blinders on current trends. I try to have my pieces be as timeless as they can be,
Okay,
but for that piece in particular, it was like more abstract paintings, that kind of look. And I just kind of made, by modernizing it, I mean like what my style would be today, kind of making it into what I would make today.
got it. And that brings me that's a good segue actually into how your style has evolved right since you started sort of pottery as from the classes right to actually being uh, doing it almost full time so I'm curious how that style has transformed.
Oh, man, it's evolved so much, especially in the past like half year to like now it's changed incredibly a lot. But when I started, my potter name is Tiny Namaste Pottery, which was derived from my yoga practice. So I was doing a lot of yoga, like mantra dishes at the time, things that said namaste on it, or like yoga sayings. So that's definitely like evolved. I don't do that anymore. It's moved away to, manifest that shit dishes, which is kind of another way of life for me, which is like, there's more meaning to it now.
Can you explain the manifest that shit like mantra? Like where did that kind of
Yeah,
come from? Like how did you, no pun intended,
like
manifest,
it,
right? Like that
it
saying.
just, yeah, it just came from wanting to empower myself. So it was like for me, like that dish was for me, and now it's for everybody to have a piece of it. But that is like a way, like for me, manifest that shit means to make your dreams come true and make those little steps and like practices and making the space to let those like dreams happen. And manifesting that shit also takes a lot of work. It's not just like imagining something and hoping that it'll come true. It's like putting the work into it. And I try to instill that in my work and like let my followers know that's what I mean by it. Not something more woo, but that's how I interpret it. And it's more so like being able to verbalize and have intention with what you want to happen and like let it come into fruition through your work.
Do you like, does the phrase come from kind of like a specific type of experience or situation that you're going through? And I'm just curious how that origin of the manifest that shit, like I think you kind of almost explained it in a therapist kind of perspective of like, taking something that you have as a dream and how do you put it into action. But I'm just curious if there was like a situation that kind of helped derive like that
Um,
saying or way of
Kind of.
thinking.
I mean, I guess my vision of where I want to be in the future and where I want my ceramics to be in the future.
Okay, makes sense. I can see how it's like a super powerful phrase that, especially like if you're, you know, purchasing something, right? Like from, if someone's purchasing like a piece of pottery from you, it's like they're getting a piece of what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, and your thought process, right? Of your work. It's like a self-expression form.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to actually kind of roll it back a little bit. I know we kind of skipped a little bit in terms of going straight into like the full-time pottery stuff, but I want to talk about and get your thoughts on like what made you want to take the leap from going from pottery as a hobby, right, to pottery as a full-time business.
So, um, I've always had like at least two jobs my entire career, or three. And when I was doing like medical social work, that was my full time job. Therapy as my private practice in the evenings as my part time job, and ceramics evenings and weekends whenever else I had time as my third job. And it kind of became too overwhelming. I didn't have enough time to do things I really wanted. Like I wanted to focus more on my ceramics. It was growing and thriving, and um, I was finding less reward and fulfillment from my full time job, and it took up the full day, 8 to 5 or eight, yeah, whatever, 9 to 5,
You just get whatever's
and
energy is like left over just into your pottery.
right. It just became too exhausting to do all three. And I have to let one go. And I've always wanted to just work for myself 100%, which was what my parents have done. And like kind of like instilled me to have that dream. Um, and it's very unconventional to have it like, be a full-time ceramicist in an Asian, like coming from an Asian family and
Mm-hmm.
culture. So I kind of
I,
just had to figure out my own like path and pave my own way. So I like originally, I wanted to just do my private practice full time, but then I realized I really love ceramics and I need way more time to develop glazes, learn how to do glaze chemistry, learn how to do 3D printing and like experiment more. I can't do that if I have another full time job.
so I kind of want to
So
stop you
that's,
there,
yeah.
and I want to ask,
Hmm.
did you tell your parents, like, what was it like when you told your parents, I'm going to be a full-time ceramicist?
Okay. So My mom was on board. I think she was pretty supportive when I told her. She was like, "Oh, okay, do whatever you want."
Okay.
But my dad, oh man, he is like, it was just last week actually. I told him, and because I
Okay.
thought he already knew, but he was asking me, "Oh, is your commute to work like okay?" And I was like, I quit." And
Okay.
then, and then he was like, "What?" And then I had to explain to him that I was doing ceramics full time and also my private practice part time.
Right.
And he looked so disappointed. And that was really hard to get past. It was like nothing I can do, whatever, however successful I am, is never going to be enough for him. So that's part of like, him and his
Okay.
own thing.
Do you think
So, yeah.
it's partially because so it's funny because I was watching this show. I think it was a YouTube. It was a Google talk. It was with Bowen Yang and Yul Kwan. So Bowen Yang's from the he's on SNL, right? An actor. And Yul Kwan is a winner on Survivor season 3. A Korean guy. He works at Korean American that works at Google, and he was saying that even though he won Survivor, right, $1 million, whatever, his parents were like, "So what?" Right? Like they weren't proud or impressed. But it wasn't until he was written up in a local Korean newspaper that his parents
Mm,
could brag to other
I
people. It's like,
see.
look, my son is a winner, right? And what I learned
Yeah, that's
about
sad.
that was social validation. Like I could just imagine,
Yeah.
what is your dad going to say to his other friends? Because in Asian culture, it tends to be more collectivist, generally speaking. And so I imagine the social status of being able to tell like other people
Yeah.
about it, like
Um,
there's probably a
okay.
concern
So,
from that end.
I mean, as I was explaining that to him, what I was doing, and I told him I'm working for myself. I have 2 businesses, and I'm like fully self-employed. And then he was like, "Oh, okay." And he was like, "You're working for yourself. That's good." So I have to
Okay,
like get past his disapproval like throughout my life, and that was just like the latest one.
got it. Okay. But yeah, I just wanted to get your take on like what your parents felt, just because I'm sure that's probably something that probably most people are curious about, and especially as Asians going into the arts, right? Like that's always something that I feel that is the maybe it's like a rite of passage almost, where like it's a question that always gets asked, right? And it's always gets asked because some of the stereotypes are true, right? Like in terms of parents just being worried that like, is my son or daughter, are they going to make it, right? Are they going to be able to take care of themselves, kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's definitely that fear. They are always like I feel like a lot of immigrant parents, Asian American parent or Asian parents were in survival mode for so long. A
Yeah.
lot of were refugees. A lot, had a lot to get lived through to get to America. So of course they're worried and concerned about their children's like future and security. Um, so
Like
I forgot what the
I
question.
think it's also understanding the opportunity. Like they may not necessarily understand the opportunity, right? Like,
Yeah.
if your whole life, maybe you grew up you immigrated here, maybe English, right, wasn't your first language. um, Historically, Asian Americans didn't have access to broader parts of America, right? And from a societal sort of perspective. So maybe just even the imagination, right, of what someone could be is just not there. It's just not a picture painted in their mind, and especially as you know that our parents' generation is becoming older, right? Like they didn't have the internet, right? They didn't have all these opportunities to see what was possible, other than, like you were saying, being in survival mode.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think they're less open-minded about other career paths
Like
than
other
what
than
they're
being
used to.
a doctor or a lawyer or
Right.
something else that is easily understandable for them, right? Because even my mom, right, in the 60s, it was the same thing, right? So
Hmm.
I think going back to just looking at it from a third party like sort of perspective, that's the thing that's so interesting, is just like it's like history repeating itself over again, like that in the 60s they wanted they wish my mom was a doctor or lawyer, or like a doctor or lawyer. In 2000s, right, like same kind of thing, right? So I think that's the part that's kind of like interesting. Like you would think it'd
I
change with the
see.
times, but sometimes it doesn't.
I think it is changing now. It's starting to
I
change.
would I would say I was talking with my friend recently, and I was saying that this is probably the last generation where someone like if we become parents, we're going to say like you have to be a lawyer or a doctor. Like that age is over now. One, because you have like YouTube, you have the internet, you have more platforms to actually be a legitimate. You have more representation in roles that necessarily weren't accessible to Asian Americans. Like you have Simu
Mm-hmm.
Liu, right? You have Michelle Yeoh, even though for Michelle Yeoh, it took god awful long time for her to get her just due, especially with everything everywhere all at once. But you can actually see success in different industries that maybe, I don't know, 50 years ago, that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, definitely. And
So I feel like people are going to be more open to it just because
I
there's more
think,
role
yeah,
models.
there's definitely more of that shift, that mental shift of being able to accept, unconventional career paths as being successful and okay. And I think that's what I have been able to do to a lot of people who follow me, and that's what they tell me. They tell me that they look up to me because I inspire them to also pursue something they want to do in the arts, which I think is amazing. Being able to be a person who can represent that for them, like that, it's achievable.
Yeah, I definitely have seen more people, even Asian Americans, in the arts, and I think that representation is really encouraging. And it's an area in our growth as an Asian American society that I wish that should be continue to be championed, right? Because I think about how so many people were forced down a certain path, maybe by their parents, right? And maybe they feel like it's too late, right? Maybe they've gone to the path where it's like they were forced to be dentists or doctors, and they don't enjoy it anymore. And all I hope is that that they can find a way to be their inner child, or things that, I guess, a sense of innocence, or the dreams that they had before things were forced down kind of upon them,
Mm-hmm.
and to really enjoy. I think that's part of being the American dream, is that idea of possibilities and opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I know I went on a tangent, but I want to go back to the pottery business, a little bit, and talk to me about like your experiences, like growing a pottery business. Specifically, there's the artistic side of pottery, and obviously making, the art and the creative expressions. But then there's also the business side, which is maybe not so much artistic, right? And like you talk about things like accounting or taxes and things like that. Like talk to me about balancing those, right? Two opposite ends of the
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of the business side of pottery
Oh
and the
man, I
art.
just learn as I go. I learn as I go. I was doing pop up markets for at least 5 years before just transitioning fully to online sales on my website. So I had that practice in person markets, meeting customers in person, selling to them. Also, like
Well, I
my
guess I guess
experience.
I was
Uh-huh.
curious about what made you want to do pop-up pottery, like almost like yeah, why did you want to do pop-up pottery versus going eventually to, like, why not start just direct to consumer online? Like,
Well, I did both. I had an Etsy, like before my Shopify website today. I had an Etsy, and like there was like just no like traffic. So I did pop up markets because people just come directly to you. They're bigger events usually, and I did really well on them at them, and so that's why I did them. I did well at them,
okay.
and yeah, and so I had that experience with like working with customers, but even before that, being able to like being a social worker for my companies before, I had a lot of like direct work with people where it felt like customer service a lot of the time, and kind of just being able to like know how to talk to people.
I was
So
actually
there was
curious
that. Hmm.
about, like, when you're doing the pop-up, like what were the benefits of doing, like highlighting your ceramics in a pop-up sort of environment? Like, what are the kind of takeaways that you got and learned from doing that?
Um, Mostly it was just fun. It was like enjoyable. I got to meet people in person and see their like initial reactions and like feedback in person. Like, I don't really see like my customers now, they're all over the world. I don't meet them, but I do miss that localness, the community, people who appreciate my work and know me locally. That was really fun. And meeting other people around me, like the other booth mates I had or other makers, and just building my network of like makers.
Like, I guess what made you, because you talked about eventually transitioning to almost purely being online, like all your sales are
Mm-hmm.
online worldwide. Like, what was the thing that kind of made you, I guess maybe temporarily stop, right? Maybe selling your pottery or advertising your pottery at pop-ups, or maybe at a local level, like in person.
It just made no sense anymore to do it in person. It would just like in person, it worked for me during that time. But then once like my business grew and a lot more people found me, I would have a sale online and everything would sell out. So I'd have nothing to show for if I had like a pop up scheduled. So it
Got it.
just made no more sense. Yeah.
So it sounds like it was like a resource constraint. Like you're only one person, right? And you're trying to make as much as you can as one person. So
Right.
like trying to
And yeah.
save inventory just for that, that seems like it was really difficult.
Right. And also, just having it sold online, like once I released the collections in that day, it was a lot easier than being up at like a market for 8 hours and breaking down my tent and like bringing everything back. And it was less labor.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Like you basically, sounds like you basically use the pop-up, right, to get initial feedback on your stuff, right? Almost like as a proof of concept. You did something that was more unscalable, like, but now online it's a lot easier to, I'm sure, manage like inventory and stuff like that, the amount of, product
It
that
was,
you
yeah,
need
it
and
was
stuff like
just
that.
very organic and kind of just starting from grassroots locally and being able to scale up.
What would you, I guess, as you transitioned away from the pop up, because that's obviously a part of your growth story as a business, as Tiny
Mm-hmm.
Namaste Pottery. What were the other sort of vehicles for growth, right? Like, I think you have an Instagram account as well, and like, was that a pivotal role in growing your awareness and growing kind of people to your Shopify or Etsy site?
Totally. Like that's where I grew. And I can almost pinpoint the moment that I put in the intention that I wanted to scale my work. And I had this vision of where I wanted to be. And it was just so exciting. It was last year around my birthday. And you know this story because we hung out and I visited you. And we went to a
Mhm.
local Oakland ceramicist
Yeah,
warehouse or
Sarah
her.
Kirsten's warehouse is
Yes.
only a couple blocks away from my place.
Yeah. So her studio, her warehouse was just so amazing to like witness, and it was it was kind of like a dream of mine to have something like that.
Okay,
But I wasn't ready yet, so I put in the intention that I wanted to scale my work, and it just kind of happened. And I that like that desire was so strong. I felt like it did manifest through my own personal work and my steps to get there. But like having that realization that this is what I want to do.
like
Really,
do you think it's also
yeah.
because like, because I remember as we walked into the studio, or her studio, Sarah Kirsten's studio, it was like seeing a warehouse full of pottery, right? And just seeing
Hmm.
all the different tools that were, someone was using. And I remember her story, like she was talking about it, she was saying like, she started off as a single potter or solo, I guess, potter entrepreneur, and that like she also had to learn stuff from scratch, like all the marketing. She admits like
Yeah.
learning on the fly,
Yeah.
like she might
Yeah.
not know what she's doing, but it was almost like this acceptance of like this is just part of the lifestyle. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's something that I remember, like, was really, I see the parallels a little bit. And I didn't know how impactful it was going to be for you, like, at that time. But I think for me, living in West Oakland, there's a lot of warehouses and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I personally love the reutilization of that space for the arts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It convinced me to buy more pottery, and to support local patrons, especially
Mm.
in areas where they really do appreciate kind of local support.
Yeah, definitely. No, it was such a like transformative feeling for me. I had such a like inner breakthrough that I wanted to like make reality. There was a piece that I had in mind that I had just made, and I had the thought, okay, this is my new work. This is going to be a new era for me. This look is going to be me from now on. And then I kind of scrapped my like past work completely. So I restarted anew and a new direction. And then suddenly everything grew really fast for me on like on social media, on Instagram. And yeah, like it was just insane. I couldn't believe it. I started at 4,000 followers around maybe October or November ish to 2021. And today I have close to, I
It's
think,
like
approaching
57.
55,000. Yeah,
I think it's
I don't know,
57. I
55.
checked earlier,
Okay,
obviously.
okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I yeah, so approaching at that rate. So it hasn't even been a year yet. But I felt like that was a really fast growth for me, and it was very organic. I've never had any ads.
Mhm.
Um, it's just really me putting out my new work and my new vision, and people seem to be receptive of it and like it.
I think one of the things that you do really well is, especially on the stories and reels aspect, right? Like, you always have a ton of content about posting the work, right? Like, you're showing the
Mm-hmm.
work, you're showing, part of what you were saying is you want to show people that how much work it goes into it, how much skill goes into it. Obviously without revealing, everything, but I think it allows people a closer view of what you do, right? In a
Yeah,
more organic way.
yeah. I think people get to know me a lot. I started to open up a lot on my Instagram, not even that long ago, like a few months ago, and like I love interacting with my customers, my followers, and they're just like a community for me now, and it's so fun to talk to them and engage with them. And I love it when they talk to me about Subi. Sometimes it's even more exciting than hearing about my ceramics. And like,
Right.
um, yeah, it's been a huge support system that I've grown, and it's just insane.
It's kind of funny
Yeah.
because we were, how I was talking to you about and asking the question about how do potters make themselves more available, right? Make themselves more human. How do they tell their stories? And it sounds like this is your way of doing it, right? To let people know that behind the art, there is a person, there's skill involved, right? There's experiences, there's love, care, etc. Right? So by having this direct conversation with the consumer, it's really allowed for better storytelling, and better understanding and appreciation of what goes on in your work. And maybe that's the reason why that maybe people continue to come back to buy different kinds of pieces from you.
I think, yeah, it's that, and I also think that they see me as somebody real, like a
Yeah,
real normal
a real
person
person. Yeah.
behind the screen, yeah, and get to know me and know my flaws, know my mistakes that I have in my like process sometimes, just not really filtering. Really, I try not to filter anything if I can help it, and just being myself and authentic.
Yeah, I think that's what social media platforms really allow people to do, and that's like one of the core key strengths of having those stories and experiences be accessible to a wide range of people.
Yeah.
So I'm actually curious, like, have you ever thought about setting up a TikTok or a Pinterest? Like, has that ever crossed
Oh,
your mind,
okay.
like, at all?
So I do. I do have a TikTok, but I lost like the information to log in, and I maybe have one or two TikToks for my pot. Like it's Tiny Namaste Pottery, and I can't log in, so I don't know what to do about that.
Okay.
And I don't really want to make a different user handle, so I'm still trying to figure out how to
You could
log
always
into
add
that.
underscores, or you can always add underscore official, or something like that. There's different ways you can kind of get around it a little bit.
Yeah, it's not on my priority list, so
Okay.
that's for some other time.
Okay. And what about, let's say, Pinterest? Because I know, like, because Pinterest, it's very visual. There's a lot of people that put different pieces of art. I'm just curious if that's something that, you've also potentially thought about or explored for another place to showcase all of your
I
pottery.
have never thought about using Pinterest, and I don't think I will. It's just not. It's not my vibe.
Not your vibe? Okay. I respect
Yeah.
that. Uh, Talk to me a little bit about the milestones that you've achieved in your business. Like you've talked about how you started at, you know, basically 0 to almost 60K, right? In terms of follower and growth. I'm sure not only just in your social media following, but also in, your sales and the things that the amount of orders around the world, right? Talk to me about like, when you felt like the key milestones were that helped you, either inspired you to move on to the next stage or make your vision, of what you want to build as, Tiny Namaste Pottery.
Um, like I, it's hard to say because like I didn't really have any set milestones. Of course, I wanted to grow my following, and like I'm okay with whatever I'm at. So, if I was okay with 30K, and I'm happy with 50K, and like if it gets to more, that'd be great. But that was never really like a huge goal that I had to achieve. It just happened. It just happened. But like I guess income wise, that was a huge milestone. Being able to match or do better than my previous job in terms of income, I was able to do. And that really helped me have the confidence to go full time. And that was really, really huge for me. And still also like trying to scale up, kind of figuring out like what I want to do next, acquiring more equipment, reinvesting into my business, just different milestones. Like the dream would be to have a gas kiln, um, and have employees. That is the goal.
Okay, so I was basically asking, uh, what was that experience like when you realized that you could actually go full time, right? Like, talk to me about the emotions and the feelings that you were kind of going through. What was going through your mind at that point in time when you were ready to make that
I
leap?
mean, of course, it was amazing. It felt like I made it. It felt like this is possible. It felt like I can actually have a career doing this and be able to support myself and my family. And it was very emotional. I think I had a lot of fear that I couldn't do it, and I put a lot of pressure on myself before shop updates. But then every time I like had a shop update, like my customers pulled through for me, and oh, I'm getting emotional now because like it means so much to me.
I mean, I can imagine it's an emotional experience because of the people who have probably supported you along the way and the work and time that you've put in. And just thinking about, coming from where you started, right, with pottery from high school, right, and to going to those classes and restarting it again, and then actually doing it as a full profession. That is like a full progression, right? That is like an entire
Mm-hmm.
journey, going from, you know, having initially the confidence, right, not having the confidence in it to actually doing it as a profession. So I can,
Yeah, like just reflecting back on when I restarted pottery, it was such a bad time in my life to being able to stick with it for several years to where I am now and seeing how much growth and a future potential I'll have is just really amazing for me to realize. And lived through. So being able to manifest it and, but putting in the work for it, it's been a very emotional like journey.
Yeah, I definitely can, can sense that. And to kind of like build off of that, you've talked about ambitions for what's next in the stage of growth for your pottery business. And, I was actually looking at two other stores that, not stores, there's other businesses that are actually based in West Oakland. One is, Ceramicist, and another one was called Love House. And so these are local potters. And one of the things that I was looking at was, you know, I'm pretty sure they probably use, they do stuff that's handmade, right? And then they also probably, I think there was something that I remember Sarah was talking about where they have molds and stuff like that. Like, talk to me about, right now you're one person, right? There's only a limited
Mm-hmm.
amount of things that you can do handmade for every single item, right? Like, to take that, next level to the business, like, I just imagine it's so hard to do everything just handmade,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess, like, what is the kind of vision that you're anticipating when you eventually may have to do less handmade stuff? Not to say that isn't going to be important, but like eventually
Mm-hmm.
to help make more products so that people can actually enjoy, the work and the art that like you're doing that still has that love kind of infused in it, but just at a bigger scale.
Yeah. So at this point, I plan to make things handmade
Right.
on my own as long as I can because I'm enjoying it still, and I can do it at my. I still have the capacity to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the future, and I don't know when that will be. Eventually, I'll have to scale up and have more employees who can help me. Probably do slip casting molds.
What
I
are
think that's what
Yeah?
Sarah did.
What
I'm
are
not sure.
what are slip casting molds?
It's like a mold that you make of like the original pot, and it's made out of plaster, and you put wet clay into it, and it makes like a replica of the cup.
Okay.
So you don't have to actually make it on the wheel. It's like made through a mold,
Mm-hmm.
and they're uniform. So that is something that is teachable to employees and others. And a lot of people who scale in ceramics end up doing that because it's also less work on your body.
Okay.
And at the point when I feel like I can't do it physically anymore, that's when I'll try to start slip casting. But
Okay.
at the same time, I'm already practicing how to slip cast just for experimentation, not because I can't throw. Like, I don't have the capacity to throw.
Like, talk to me a little bit about, because you mentioned how sometimes your body, from what it sounds like, as you get older, can't take as many reps of doing like handmade stuff because in terms of just quantity. So talk to me about
Mm-hmm.
like the transition that you see a lot of potters do as they're older. Like, was it more they just do less in quantity and that's it, right? And like how your body kind of changes as you get older and the capacity to do more or less pottery.
I don't know what other potters do. Maybe some start to hand build, which is like less work on the wheel, or maybe they like transition to sculptures. Maybe they do the slip casting, or hire other people to do like their work, and they do more design. So I'm not really sure what other
Okay.
people do. I guess it's just their preference.
Like,
But
I'm curious, like what degrades,
yeah.
right? Like what, like, do you mention how, like, is it just the body gets tired, or is it like the
Oh,
muscles, right? Like,
um,
you're just not as clean as you were before in terms of
well,
small. Okay.
carpal tunnel is very real. The for potters,
Okay.
you can definitely get that, or wrist injuries, or other injuries, I guess. So there's just the wear on your body. It's it takes a lot on your body.
Okay. Is there, like, are there things where it's just like if it's a lot of like wear on your body, is it a lot of potters have to make sure that they do, physical therapy to a certain degree, that they actually have to, I don't know, work out, right? Like they have to strengthen certain muscles or let them recover. Like, is that part of like a potter's routine as they get older, since it does start to take a more physical wear and tear on their body?
Yeah, I have no idea what people do, but for me, I definitely limit myself to throwing one bag of clay, which is 25 pounds or less, a day, and no more than like 2 or 3 bags a week, so that I'm not overusing like my wrist muscles. I do also have a masseuse who helps me with like massages, and yoga definitely also helps with like strengthening and like stretching out.
It almost sounds like that's an underinvested, potentially an underinvested part of running a yoga business is how do you take care of your body, right? So that you're able to be proficient at the wheel. And I imagine like rest periods are also really important. And like you mentioned, like knowing your daily limit. It's almost like a work yoga, not yoga, like pottery almost a workout, right? Like you have to kind of know
Totally,
your
yeah.
limit. Like maybe you can have a PR, right? But you also have to probably eat well. You have to take care of your body, reinvest that money into
Hmm.
your health.
Yeah, yeah. So I try to not throw on the wheel more than like 2 days in a row, or otherwise I do feel the tiredness in my body. I like to prepare myself with like breakfast and just make sure that I'm good for the day before I start working, but also listen to my body. If I'm not feeling like it's a good day to throw because like I'm messing up too much,
Mm-hmm.
like if I mess up more than like twice, then I just stop completely because it's just like I don't want to be thrown off and make more mistakes.
Is I'm just out of curiosity. I know hydration is really important, but if like let's say you're doing extended periods of time on the wheel, right? Like how important is the type of food you eat or how often you hydrate, right? In terms of just maintaining that focus, right? I'm just curious about a little bit more about the preparation like phase.
Um, I never really thought of that. I just kind of do things normally. I've never really been affected by the food I eat unless it's something like super like heavy or oily. But I try to keep things like light and healthy in the morning, and then I feel pretty good and energized.
Okay,
And water intake, I just drink water as I normally do.
got it. Okay, yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was just like I think food has an important part in terms of daily activity. And maybe if there was something where like you weren't hydrated enough, like you start to mess up, right? Because like your mind might be focused, but your body might not be for whatever reason. So it was just more thinking about it from like a physical
Oh,
aspect
I
relative to
see.
food.
For me, it's sleep. So if I don't get enough sleep or well enough sleep, I'm not gonna function well on the wheel.
Got it. Okay. I think that makes sense. Like that's where the focus, I think, really comes into play and
Hmm.
the flow state. Otherwise, imagine if you don't get enough sleep, you're gonna kind of be a little bit off the game, off your, I guess, like you're gonna be a little bit off more often than
Hmm.
not.
Yeah, you definitely have to take care of yourself in any kind of career path.
Got it. So I know recently you went to a convention for pottery. I believe it's called the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts. Like I'm pretty sure most people haven't really gone to a pottery convention. Like, talk to me about what goes on at a pottery convention and what kind of experience that you took away from it and brought back to your own practice.
Oh man, Antica was amazing. I went this year because it was in Sacramento, which is like in our state of California, and it kind of bounces alternatively east and west coast or something like that every year. So it was close by, and I went and took that opportunity. And I it's like 3 or 4 or 5 day convention. And I didn't really have a lot of expectations. I just thought that I would go to a lot of like presentations and lectures and meet some ceramicists that I looked up to, and all that did happen. The biggest thing I took away was being able to, besides meeting people I looked up to or recognized, going to the lectures and being able to ask questions directly to the experts on glaze formulation or clay bodies
Like,
or
I guess what
um,
defines an expert in the pottery world?
uh, I don't know. Maybe it's um like self titles. I'm not sure,
Okay.
but like um people who are professors or researchers, I guess.
Okay. So
I don't know
you're
what
saying
would be
like these are
considered an
people who
expert.
do like chemical science, right? At, I don't know, UCLA, right? They talk about different compounds, and I guess for whatever reason it relates back to pottery. Or are we talking about like, here's someone who's done, I don't know, XYZ, these types of accomplishments, and I'm guessing there's a national pottery sort of association that sort of governs
I think
everything.
I would say a lot of the experts, I would define them as people who are like have a lot of experience and are well versed and well known for their craft in particular. If it's like glaze chemistry and research, or clay bodies, or something else in particular, or a certain type of like niche that they do. So being able to ask those questions or ask questions to them directly while they're on a panel was pretty cool. And just understanding more history behind the works of specific artists and their own lectures. Um, that was awesome. Another cool experience I had was like people actually recognizing my work
Oh,
or
nice.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the convention, like there was a cup sale where like anybody could donate their like ceramic cup, and one day like people would just go line up and buy them, and it's for a donation thing. And some people were able to recognize my work, or yeah, or I recently posted a similar cup that I gave to the cup sale to a Facebook pottery group, and somebody commented that they recognized my pot at the cup sale, and I was
Oh,
like, oh wow,
that's
that's cool.
awesome.
Yeah, so the recognition of like my style was pretty cool to see, and also being able to meet artists that like I looked up to, and finding out that they also admire my work and doing a trade, that was another cool experience. Meeting, yeah, just meeting people that I follow and
Like actually
becoming like
seeing
friends
them
with
in the
them.
flesh, and especially during this like time of the
Yeah,
pandemic, like being able to talk about and exchange experiences. Because I'm sure it's like, I'm sure it's different, maybe in, I don't know, maybe the Southern California scene versus just like the pottery, like everyone's from around the US or maybe the world is at this specific convention and probably brings different
yeah.
perspectives.
Yeah, no, it was just cool seeing them in person, IRL versus the internet.
Got it.
So that was amazing.
Cool. I think one thing that I was really interested in was, you know, pottery is, you know, has been around for thousands of years, right? Like you look in the history books, like there's, you know, the technology for making uh, pottery has evolved over time, but there's still obviously, I imagine, some basic elements like you need, you know, rock or some sort of clay and water or some sort of, you know, material. But I'm curious how, you know, technology has kind of changed pottery in
Hmm.
both the sense that, like, what are the ways that maybe you're thinking about automating certain pottery processes without sacrificing the humanistic like art of, you know, making it handcrafted.
Hmm. Can you reframe that question?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, you're cutting out a bunch of tiles, right? Like, and you're doing
Hmm.
that by hand. Like, is that like clay tiles or something for whatever project that you're working on? Like, is there a way where it's just like, hey, I put these into a machine, right? And basically it makes these clay
Oh,
tiles
yes.
like for me, right? Where like maybe that's not the fun part of the pottery experience, the
Yes.
fun part being on the wheel. Like we've talked about slip casting, right? As a way of like a form of automation so that that way
Hmm.
like you can balance the art aspect of it, like the humanistic side of it,
Hmm.
versus, you know, technology leverage helping potters, right, get rid of like the more tedious
Yeah,
parts.
totally. Technology for ceramics has definitely been improved a lot. And I think even in just the recent years, it has expanded so much into like 3D modeling, prints for different pieces, like a mug or something, and then making a silicone cast to a plaster cast, and then you have that mold. And that has been huge and kind of revolutionary in the past few years. And 3D printing clay, like clay work, that's like another thing that people are still researching. I feel like there's limitations to that though, because they all kind of look very similar,
Sure.
but there is that too. And then in terms of like maybe factories or like warehouses where they have people manufacture like molds. I don't really know what kind of machines they use, but there's definitely that like machine or the process that makes it easier. Like at Sarah's place, she definitely had some of those some of that equipment that made it a lot easier to make plates or bowls or
Mm-hmm.
whatever she had. Um, so there is that. I think there's definitely improvement needed for a lot of the technology for making work, but right now, I think we're at a good place.
Got it. Like, what would you say actually is the most tedious part of the ceramics pottery making experience? Is it like preparing clay, or like, I don't know, not maybe not so ideating,
Yes.
but like I'm sure there's things that potters don't really want to do, but they know they have to do it, and probably would love to just spend time being artists versus
Mm-hmm.
pure preparation,
Yeah.
handmade preparation of stuff.
Um, well, that also depends on the artist. Some people like throwing on the wheels. Some people prefer glazing. Some people prefer for trimming. So it depends on what each person likes
Got it.
in terms of the process. But yeah, I mean, there is like trimming for me. I hate trimming. Trimming
What is
sucks. I
trimming?
wish that could be. Trimming is like shaving down clay to make it more even and like level, or just like having a foot on the bottom of your bowl or cup or something like that. Just shaving off clay. And like like recently I've been making I made 200 tiles
Right.
recently this week, which is like I hated it. I wish there was a easier way, which would be like slip casting the tiles, which also is another process that I don't like to do, which is the whole process of making like a plaster mold and slip casting. I mean, there's a lot of work that is not that like enjoyable and fun, but you
Right.
got to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious, like, because no one really talks about the tedious stuff about pottery making. Like, I think most people just see the end result, but I'm always just curious, like, what are the things that people have to grind through that just aren't always seen.
Yeah, it's like just part of it, part of the process, and I've accepted it.